All right, get ready to dive deep into self-discipline.
Sounds intense.
It is, but in a good way, I promise.
Ah,
Our listeners really loaded us up with excerpts from The Science of Self-Discipline.
by Peter Hollins. Yeah, it's a fascinating read.
So we're going to unpack some serious willpower secrets, help everyone make self-discipline feel, I don't know, a little less like a chore.
Exactly. We're going to make it practical, stuff you can use today.
Now, this book doesn't mess around. It jumps right into the science, saying willpower, it's not just some vague idea. It's tied to our brains.
It's the prefrontal cortex, to be precise.
The prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, it's like the command center up there helps us make decisions, not just go with every impulse.
So for years, people thought, oh, you're either disciplined or you're not. But Hollins is saying it's more like, what, a skill.
More like a muscle, actually. You can train it, make it stronger.
But like any muscle, you can overwork it too, right?
Exactly. Hollins calls that willpower depletion. It gets tired, just like you would after lifting weights.
So how do we get those willpower muscles ripped, so to speak? Everyone wants more self-discipline, but where do we start?
Well, one of the most interesting things Hollins talks about is this famous study, the Stanford marshmallow experiment.
Oh, I've heard of that. Weren't they giving kids marshmallows?
Yep. They told these kids, you can eat this marshmallow NW or wait and get 2-2 later.
Talk about temptation. I'd gobbled that thing up instantly.
Well, some kids did. But the ones who resisted, who showed that willpower, not only did their prefrontal cortexes look different as adults.
You mean physically different in their brains?
Yeah. But get this, those kids were also more successful in life overall.
Wait, are you serious? Just from resisting a marshmallow?
It shows the power of self-control, how important it is to learn it early on.
But what about those of us who, maybe weren't marshmallow-resisting champs as kids? Is all hope lost?
Not at all. That's the beauty of it. It's never too late to work that muscle.
Okay, that's reassuring. So when we talk about boosting willpower, a lot of people think it's all about being super strict.
Right.
Depriving yourself.
That's a myth, actually. One of the big things Hollins debunks is this idea that self-discipline equals misery.
Yeah, nobody wants to live a life of saying no to everything fun.
Exactly. It's not about forcing yourself. It's about making those good choices more appealing, I guess.
Okay, so less about rules, more about finding the right motivation. So what does fuel self-discipline then?
According to Hollins, it's the feeling of progress when you're working towards something that really matters to you.
So it's not just about what we should be doing, it's got to have that personal spark.
Right. He talks about 3 key motivators: autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Okay, break those down for me.
Think of it like this. Autonomy is having control, calling your own shots. Mastery is getting really good at something you enjoy. And purpose? Well, that's the feeling that what you're doing has a bigger impact.
Which one resonates most with me? I think mastery for sure. I love learning new stuff, getting better at things. You.
Definitely that sense of accomplishment is super motivating, and it feeds right back into self-discipline.
Makes sense. If you love what you're doing, putting in the effort isn't so bad.
Exactly. But even when we're motivated, we all hit those moments where willpower just fizzles out. Why is that?
I know that feeling all too well.
Remember how we talked about willpower being like a muscle? Well, it has its limits. It gets tired, especially for making tons of decisions, resisting temptation all day long.
So it's not just about being strong enough. We're literally using up this mental resource.
And here's the thing. Our minds often give up before our bodies do.
So you're saying we might actually have more willpower than we think we do?
Absolutely. We just need to learn how to tap into it. Hollins shares some really interesting tactics used by Navy SEALs, the ultimate masters of self-discipline.
Okay, Navy SEALs, now that's serious stuff.
They have this thing called the 40% rule. Basically, when your brain is screaming, I'm done, you're actually only at 40% of your true capacity.
So it's all about pushing past those mental limits.
Exactly. We're capable of way more than we think. Hollins uses a simple example of doing push-ups.
Okay, let's hear it.
You might think you can only do 10, right? But if you push through that, do just one more, suddenly you know you can do 11, then 12. Before you know it, you're doing 20. Double what you thought possible.
So it's like our beliefs are holding us back physically.
Our minds are powerful tools. The SEALs teach us to train our minds to be resilient, to keep going, even when it's tough.
Okay, so we've got this willpower muscle we can train. We often underestimate ourselves. And true motivation comes from the right goals, the things that light us up. But even with all that, sometimes we stumble. What are some of those hidden things that sabotage our efforts?
Great question. Sometimes it's not even willpower, it's these sneaky discipline drainers that trip us up. One of the biggest is what Hollins calls the false hope syndrome.
False hope syndrome. Sounds ominous.
It's basically setting yourself up for failure with crazy high expectations, thinking you'll change everything overnight.
Well, I've been there. Go big or go home.
Yeah.
And then end up going home defeated.
Exactly. Think about people trying to quit smoking cold turkey.
Yeah, just stop. Completely. Doesn't usually work, does it?
Research shows gradual reduction is way more sustainable. It's about realistic goals.
Okay, slow and steady wins the race. Any other discipline drainers we should watch out for?
This one's a classic, and I bet tons of people can relate. Parkinson's law. Ever notice how work expands to fill the time you give it?
Oh, you mean like if I have a week to do a project, it'll take me a week? Even if I could do it in 2 days? Guilty as charged.
That's it. So Hollins suggests setting aggressive deadlines, creates a sense of urgency, forces you to be more efficient.
I like that. A little fire under my disciplined self, but sometimes it's not even external stuff. It's that internal struggle with being uncomfortable, you know? How do we get over that?
You're right. Sometimes it comes down to our relationship with discomfort. That's where things get tough, but also super empowering.
Okay, I'm listening.
Hollins doesn't sugarcoat it. Discipline is uncomfortable. No way around that. But we can get better at handling it, like building up mental toughness.
So the more uncomfortable stuff we do, the easier it gets. Is that the idea?
Basically, the more we expose ourselves to it, the more resilient we become. It's like flexing that uncomfortable muscle.
Flexing that uncomfortable muscle. Got to remember that one. But seriously, how do we do that? Just grit our teeth and bear it.
There's a better way. It's called urge surfing. Instead of fighting urges head-on, you observe them, like waves. Notice the sensations without judgment. Have you ever tried this?
I can't say I have, but I can see the logic. If you detach from the urge, maybe it loses its power.
Exactly. It's shifting your relationship with discomfort. You become a curious observer, not a terrified victim.
Okay, that's actually really helpful. So we've covered a lot about willpower, motivation, and those sneaky discipline drainers. What are your thoughts so far?
This idea that we can actually train our brains to be more disciplined is pretty amazing, right? It's not about being perfect, it's about progress.
Totally agree. And even when we stumble, those are just learning experiences. But before we jump into the nitty-gritty of habit formation, is there anything that's really standing out to you so far?
For me, it's that self-discipline isn't about deprivation. It's not about forcing yourself into a life you hate. It's about understanding what motivates you, setting the right goals, and, yeah, learning to deal with the tough stuff. But most importantly, believing you can actually change and grow.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, let's move on to habit formation then. Time to put all this knowledge into action. Okay, let's talk habits. This is where the magic happens, right? We've covered willpower, motivation, but how do we actually make self-discipline, I don't know, automatic?
You want to make it effortless, part of who you are, not something you have to force. That's what Hollins gets into next, yeah.
So what's the secret sauce for making discipline run on autopilot? Is there like a habit formation formula?
Well, there's no magic bullet, but there are strategies. And Hollins starts by saying, hey, be realistic, change takes time. In fact, he drops this knowledge bomb, 66 days on average for an action to become automatic.
66 days, huh? Guess that means no overnight transformations. It's about consistency, sticking with it even when you don't feel like it.
You got it. And that's where the small steps thing comes in. Hollins uses the example of exercise, like turning it into a habit.
I need all the help I can get on that front.
You don't start by running a marathon, right? Just one lap around the block. Then gradually over time, you do a bit more. That one lap turns into a regular jog. Then it's just part of your routine.
I like that. Makes it less intimidating. It's not this huge, overwhelming change. It's just building up slowly.
Exactly. And here's the thing a lot of people miss. Those first few weeks of a new habit, they're going to feel wrong.
Wait, wrong. But if it's a good habit, shouldn't it feel good?
You'd think so. But our brains, they love familiar patterns, even if those patterns are bad for us. So anything new feels like a disruption.
So if I'm feeling that resistance, it's actually a good sign.
Could be. Means you're pushing out of your comfort zone, and that's where growth happens. We're back to flexing that uncomfortable muscle.
Got to get those mental gains. Okay, this is making sense. But sometimes even starting a new habit feels overwhelming. Any tips on where to begin?
Yeah, Hollins talks about that. First off, you don't have to do it alone. He has a whole chapter on how important relationships are for willpower.
You mean like who we hang out with affects how disciplined we are?
More than you might think. He talks about these wild studies, the Ash conformity experiments. They gave people a vision test, super easy, obvious answer.
Okay, where's the twist?
They put actors in the group who all gave the wrong answer on purpose, and over a third of the real participants went along with it, even though they knew it was wrong.
Whoa, peer pressure is real.
Shows how much we want to fit in, even if it means ignoring our own judgment.
So how do we use this to our advantage when it comes to building good habits?
Hollins says, choose your company wisely. Hang out with people who support your goals, who keep you accountable, people who inspire you.
It's like building your self-discipline support system.
Exactly. Remember that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with? It applies here too.
Makes sense. Got to level up my social circle.
Yeah.
But what about sharing your goals publicly? Isn't that good for accountability?
It can be, but Hollins actually warns against sharing too widely. There's this thing called the premature sense of completeness.
Premature sense of what now?
It means when you announce your goals, your brain gets a little reward, like you've already achieved something, even though you haven't done anything yet.
Oh, I see. It's like tricking your brain into thinking you're already done, so you lose motivation.
Yep. It's better to focus on the actions, the process, and let the results speak for themselves.
Work in silence. Let success be the noise, right? But speaking of success, kind of talk about that classic test of willpower. Delayed gratification. Those marshmallow kids again.
The marshmallow test is a perfect example. It's all about resisting those quick hits of pleasure for something better in the long run.
So how do we apply that to, like, everyday life? Because let's be real, we're constantly choosing between what feels good now and what's good for us later.
It goes back to those 3 motivators we talked about: autonomy, mastery, purpose.
Right. They give us that deeper drive, so we don't just go for the easy, instant gratification thing.
Exactly. When you connect your actions to a bigger purpose, those moments of sacrifice, they're easier to handle. It's like you're tapping into a stronger willpower.
Okay, but how do we practice delayed gratification? Give me some real-life examples.
Sure, it could be as simple as choosing to work on that important project before watching your favorite show.
Yeah.
Or picking a healthy meal instead of the greasy takeout, knowing you'll feel better later.
So it's about making choices that align with our values, our long-term goals, even if they're not the most fun in the moment.
You got it. And this ties into a powerful concept: acting on behalf of your future self.
I like that. It's like making decisions that benefit the person you want to become.
There's actually research showing we often have this disconnect from our future selves. We see them almost as strangers, so it's harder to prioritize their well-being.
So how do we make those future selves feel more real?
Visualization is a great tool. Spend some time imagining your future self having achieved those goals. Feel the emotions, the sense of accomplishment. The more vivid you make it, the more you'll be driven to make choices that support that vision.
It's like creating a mental movie that inspires you to take action. I dig it.
Yeah.
But what about those moments where you're tempted to give in? Like, I know I can be impulsive.
Right.
Any strategies for that?
Hollins has this cool tool, the 10-10-10 rule. Whenever you're facing a tough decision, ask yourself 3 questions. How will I feel about this in 10 minutes, in 10 hours, and in 10 days?
Oh, it's like fast-forwarding your decision-making.
Yeah.
Forces you to consider not just the immediate pleasure, but the potential regret later on.
Exactly. Helps you shift your perspective, so you're more likely to make the choice that aligns with your goals.
Love that. I'm definitely going to use that. I think our listeners are starting to feel a lot more equipped to handle those self-discipline challenges. But we've got to be honest, we all have weak moments. When motivation dips, what does Hollins suggest?
He gives these 4 powerful questions to reconnect with your goals.
Okay, hit me with them. We all need those reminders sometimes.
The first one's all about honesty. Do I want to be a disciplined person or not? Straight up, yes or no. No excuses.
Wow, that's cutting right to the chase. You're choosing who you want to be.
Exactly. Then it's, am I doing the right thing or just what's easy?
Ooh, that's good. It's easy to fool yourself into thinking you're doing the right thing when really you're just taking the path of least resistance.
Yep. Honesty is key. Then, to dig deeper, what is my payoff? Why am I putting myself through this?
It's remembering that why, that bigger reason that makes the effort worthwhile.
Like those bodybuilders pushing their limits. They're not doing it for fun. They have a vision, and they're willing to endure the pain to get there.
It's that classic trade-off. Short-term discomfort for long-term gain. What's the last question?
Am I being self-aware?
So, noticing those moments when you're about to slip up.
Exactly. Like an internal alarm system.
Yeah.
The more self-aware you are, the quicker you can catch yourself before making a choice you'll regret.
Okay, I'm loving these questions. Simple, but they get right to the core of things. They tie back to everything we've been talking about, right? Understanding your motivations, setting the right goals, building those habits. What are your thoughts?
This whole mindset piece has been really eye-opening. We focus so much on the tactics, but our beliefs are just as important.
Totally agree. It's not just what you do, it's how you think about it. Got to have that optimistic, I can do this attitude.
Hollins talks about that too. He has a whole chapter on the power of optimism and believing in yourself, even when it's tough.
And he introduces this idea of the endowed progress effect, right? I'm curious about that one.
It's the idea that we're more likely to stick with a goal if we feel like we've already made some progress, like we're starting the race a few steps ahead.
Makes sense. It's like you're already on your way, so why not keep going? But how do you actually create that feeling of progress, even when you're just starting out?
He gives the example of those car wash loyalty cards. People were more likely to complete the card and earn a free wash if they got a card that already had a few stamps on it, even if the total washes needed was the same.
So it's highlighting those small wins, those early successes, to build momentum.
Exactly. It's encouraging your brain, showing it that you can achieve this.
Which brings us back to celebrating those small wins, no matter how small. Each step forward is a victory.
Absolutely. And Hollins also talks about focusing on the process, not just the outcome.
It's not just about the destination, it's about enjoying the journey, right?
Exactly. Even when it's tough, if you're only focused on the end goal, you miss the valuable stuff along the way.
The journey is the destination. I've heard that before.
And it leads to another important shift, focusing on what you can control. You can't always control the outcome, but you can control your actions, your attitude, your effort.
It's taking ownership, right?
Yeah.
Showing up and doing the work, regardless of the results.
And even when there are setbacks, see them as opportunities to learn and grow.
Don't get discouraged, get better.
Exactly. Self-discipline is a journey, not a destination. It's about constantly pushing yourself, evolving, and embracing those ups and downs.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. Willpower, motivation, those sneaky saboteurs, habits, mindset.
It's been quite the exploration.
Before we wrap up this part, any final thoughts you want our listeners to take away?
The biggest thing is self-discipline isn't about perfection, it's about progress. We all slip up, but it's about learning, practicing, pushing yourself further each time.
Love that. It's a journey, not a sprint. Ready to get into some specific strategies for building those habits.
Absolutely. Let's get tactical.
Okay, we've laid the groundwork, explored the mindset behind self-discipline. Now let's get down to the brass tacks. How do we actually build those rock-solid habits, the ones that make discipline feel, I don't know, less like a struggle and more like just who you are?
That's the question, isn't it? And Hollins gives some really practical advice here. First off, he says, don't try to change everything at once. Pick one habit to focus on.
Yeah, makes sense. Trying to overhaul your whole life overnight. That's a recipe for burnout. Better to start small, build up that momentum.
Exactly. So pick one habit, make it specific, manageable. Remember that example of starting with just one lap around the block. It's about those small wins, building confidence.
Okay, so we've chosen our habit. We're committed to starting small. What's next?
Consistency is key. Do the thing regularly, ideally at the same time each day. You're creating a routine, making it automatic.
Like you're training your brain to expect it. It becomes part of your rhythm.
Right. And here's a powerful tool to help you stick with it. Reward yourself for those small wins.
Now you're talking. I'm a big believer in rewards. It's like giving yourself an incentive to keep going.
Think about it. Every time you do something that feels good, your brain releases dopamine, that little burst of happiness.
So we're basically hacking our own reward system, associating the new habit with something positive.
You got it. And the rewards don't have to be huge either. Listening to your favorite podcast while you work out, a cup of coffee after you finish that writing session.
Little things that make you happy. Makes sense.
And remember what we said before. New habits often feel wrong at first.
Yeah, because our brains are so used to the old way of doing things.
Exactly. So don't get discouraged if it feels weird or uncomfortable. That's a sign you're pushing out of your comfort zone, which is where the growth happens.
Back to that uncomfortable muscle again.
And another important point, you don't have to go it alone.
You're talking about social support. We touched on that earlier.
Right. Surround yourself with people who encourage you, support your goals.
Like having your own personal cheer squad for self-discipline.
Exactly. And it's not just about cheering you on, it's practical help too. Find a mentor, a coach, an accountability partner, someone who can give you guidance, resources, maybe a little push when you need it.
So you're creating this whole support system for success.
That's the idea. And speaking of success, Hollins introduces a really helpful framework called the 6 Sources of Influence model.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's that all about?
It was developed by a guy named Joseph Grenny, and it basically identifies the 6 key things that influence our behavior.
So like a roadmap for understanding why we do what we do and how to change it.
Exactly. The model looks at 2 main categories, individual and social.
Makes sense. We're influenced by stuff within ourselves, but also by the people around us.
Right. And within each of those, there are 2 sub-factors, motivation and ability.
So it's not just wanting to change, it's having the skills and resources to actually make it happen.
You got it. And the model also looks at the impact of our environment.
That's huge, because sometimes you're trying to build a good habit, but your environment is working against you.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
this model says, hey, consider all of these influences. Personal motivation, social support, the cues in your environment, it all plays a role.
It's a more holistic view of habit formation. It's not just about willpower. It's about creating a system that supports you.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've gone from the science of willpower to the nitty-gritty of habits and all the mindset stuff in between.
It's been a fantastic journey.
Before we wrap things up completely, any final thoughts for our listeners? What's that one key takeaway you hope they'll remember?
I think the most important thing is self-discipline isn't about perfection. It's about progress. You will have slip-ups, but it's about learning from them, practicing, and pushing yourself further each time.
It's a journey, not a destination. And to all our listeners out there, I hope you're feeling inspired, ready to take action. Remember, you don't have to be perfect. Just focus on making progress one step at a time.
And don't forget to celebrate those small wins along the way. That's what keeps you going.
Absolutely. Surround yourself with supportive people, create an environment that helps you succeed, and never underestimate the power of your own mind. Now go out there and crush those goals. You got this.